everyone, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the 3&D here on the Empty the Bench podcast network. Make sure you hit subscribe below and follow our socials at the 3&D ETB and at ETB Network. On tonight's episode, we got a jam-packed slate for you. We're going to be going over the Central Division, the Atlantic Division, a couple more headlines that are going on in the NBA as we're only a couple of weeks away from training camp beginning and only a few weeks away from the NBA season tipping off. Nick Morgasen and Ben Kruse will also be joining the show later on to talk about the Celtics, to talk about the Nets. I'll be talking about the Knicks, and we'll be going over everything along the Atlantic Division. So I hope everybody's doing well. Haven't had an episode in the last few weeks. Not too much news going on, obviously. With football starting up, that's kind of like taking the priority of everybody's time. There hasn't been too many things going down, but one of the bigger things that broke this week, the Philadelphia 76ers signed Kelly Oubre Jr. To add to their roster. So he signed a one-year deal for the veteran minimum, and this brings the Sixers roster out to a much more modest size. They got a lot more players now under contract. This signing also is added with Patrick Beverley. Mo Bamba was also added. Montrezl Harrell was brought back. And a few other players with PJ Tucker already under contract. We had the whole James Harden situation going on. So this gives them plenty of depth in the backcourt with James Harden potentially being out for a little while. So the 76ers are in a little bit of an interesting situation. This was a good signing. I was interested to see why Oubre kind of like stuck out for a while and why he wasn't necessarily one of the more sought-after free agents this offseason. He was coming off a year where he spent the year in Charlotte, and he was getting paid about $12-13 million. He signed a pretty big contract just a few years ago, but he'll settle for the veteran minimum, probably come off the bench for the 76ers. I'm not sure exactly what their starting lineup is going to be. It can go a lot of different ways, especially with James Harden out. I mean, DeAnthony Melton got a lot of time last year. He'll likely be an option for their starting backcourt. You got Tyrese Maxey, who you would assume is definitely going to be one of their stars, whether he starts at the 1 or the 2. But this is a good overall depth kind of signing. Oubre is a very good defender. He's a good stretch forward too. He can play the 2, he can play the 3, and he can play the 4. It gives them versatility coming off the bench. And even if they have to slot him in as a starter, it's not the end of the world. He's an all-around pretty solid player. So the Sixers are putting together a pretty decent team. Later on in the episode, we'll be going over the Atlantic Division, so we'll be giving you more of an in-depth look at the Philadelphia 76ers. But Kelly Oubre was signed, and we'll be headed there. And also, more news coming out of the trade market. Kevin Porter Jr. Obviously got into some more trouble. He's definitely not new to being in trouble. He's been under fire for a while now for a variety of things, but not going to go into too many details about Kevin Porter Jr., but he's in some issues right now, and the Houston Rockets have had enough, and they're looking to trade him. They're trying to trade him before training camp starts. There isn't too much of a trade market for him right now. It seems like the Rockets almost want to get rid of him as soon as possible. And I don't necessarily blame them at all. I think that it would be a smart move to get rid of him basically as soon as they can. It was going to be an interesting move anyway, with Fred VanVleet signing there, Dylan Brooks signing there. It was going to be interesting to see how they started all of those guys. You would assume that VanVleet and Jalen Green would be the starting backcourt for the Rockets, and then Porter would probably come off the bench for them. But this is not going to happen anyway. No teams have really emerged on the trade market for Kevin Porter Jr. at all. It's a somewhat new situation. You know, there was a domestic abuse type of thing, and they've said enough is enough. I mean, we've already seen Kevin Porter Jr. get under fire when he was on the Cleveland Cavaliers. He fell in the NBA draft to a late first-round pick because of his character issues. Barely played at the one season he played at USC as a freshman because of issues with the team. He fell with the Cavaliers. The Cavaliers didn't like him as a clubhouse presence. They decided to ship him off to the Rockets, and that's where he kind of turned the corner and became a very, very solid player. over the last couple of years with him and Green as the primary backcourt. He turned himself into a pretty solid point guard as well, good floor general, and he's definitely, a lot of teams are going to be interested in him. It'll be interesting though to see what kind of market he has. He's not going to get traded for very much. I can see I can see them settling for just a second round pick or something like that. He actually is getting paid pretty decently. He signed an extension with the Rockets as well, so he's getting paid decent money. He's not on a rookie deal or anything like that, so you got to factor that into the equation. But if he's got his head screwed on straight, he can definitely be a key player for a variety of competitive teams. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens with him. And then as for the other guys on the trade market, Damian Lillard and James Harden, it's been radio silence with both of them. The Blazers, it's almost seemed like Damian Lillard was going to report to the Blazers for training camp. News just came out somewhat recently that he wouldn't report to training camp, and now the Blazers are trying to work out a deal before training camp starts. The clock keeps ticking. It doesn't seem like they're closing in on any trade. But again, as we said 2 months ago during it, when NBA free agency started, it's going to be one of those situations where out of nowhere, everybody's going to get a Bleacher Report on their phone saying like Damian Lillard traded to Miami Heat in a blockbuster deal. And we're going to be like, wow, like we rush to Twitter, try to figure out who he got traded for, all of that. So it's going to be one of those things that kind of comes out of nowhere. Is my opinion on it. As far as the James Harden one's a lot trickier because they don't necessarily have to trade him, and him and Daryl Morey's beef is almost something that I could see Daryl Morey holding on to Harden, especially through training camp and for the season to start. Despite him, they're not going to trade him until they get the right price. The Damian Lillard situation, though, is very interesting. There's also been rumors that if he gets traded to a team that is not the Miami Heat, he's going to request a trade from that team as well. So it's pretty crazy between the two of them. I'm not sure what to believe and all that, but based on Damian Lillard's track record, it would be very difficult to believe that if a trade to the Heat, it doesn't happen, that he won't ever report to training camp. I almost feel like that if worse comes to worse, he will at least start the season with the Trailblazers, maybe try to put up some good numbers, make a case for himself. And if Miami gets off to a so-so start, they could pull the trigger and maybe trade, and the Blazers could end up getting more than they could get right now for him. I think that that's something that could help both sides, but we'll see. I mean, training camp is just a week or two away. Preseason games will be starting in the next couple of weeks. The season's going to be starting in just under a month. So these things are going to start unraveling and going very quickly. So jumping over from those two pockets of news, we're going to start our 2023-24 NBA season previews. We'll start things off with the Central Division. We're going to do two divisions at a time for the next 3 weeks for each episode. We'll save the Atlantic Division for last because I got a couple of guests coming on, as I said in the beginning, to talk about the Brooklyn Nets and to talk about the Boston Celtics and everything going on in the Atlantic Division. But we'll go over the Central Division first off. So obviously the number one team in the Central Division that everybody's going to look out for, everybody's going to keep an eye on to start this season will be the Milwaukee Bucks, the 2021 NBA champions. So the Milwaukee Bucks enter the new season with a brand new head coach in Adrian Griffin. He was an assistant under Mike Budenholzer for a while. He finally got the head coaching job. And some rumors are starting to go around now that Giannis might be a little bit unhappy with Milwaukee. He may not be open to signing an extension. I believe he's got 2 years left on his contract this season and the next season, and then he can become a free agent. I don't think he's a free agent after this season, but he hasn't been willing to sign an extension. He wants to see the Bucks kind of be more committed to winning in the future, is what he's come out and said. It's a little bit confusing though, because I think that they're, for the most part, pretty all in it to keep competing over the next several years. I mean, they re-signed Chris Middleton this offseason. They still have Drew Holiday under contract. They keep bringing in veterans. They brought in Malik Beasley. They brought in Robin Lopez to join his brother Brooke. And I think that they're doing as much as they can with the high salary cap number that they have to try to kind of stay in competition and, make Giannis happy. But projected starting five for the Milwaukee Bucks is going to be Drew Holiday, Grayson Allen, Chris Middleton, Giannis, and Brooke Lopez. Coming off the bench, Bobby Portis returns, who is one of the best bench players over the past couple of seasons. Malik Beasley was signed from the Los Angeles Lakers. Pat Connaughton remains. Jay Crowder was re-signed. And they have Marjon Beauchamp, who was a rookie last season, who should definitely see some more time heading into this season. So their key additions were Malik Beasley and Robin Lopez, who they added. A couple of rookies. They also were able to bring in 2 second-round picks in Andre Jackson Jr. from UConn and Chris Livingston from Kentucky. So overall, the Bucks probably are still the favorites to come out of this division, in my opinion. According to sports books, they're pretty much projected to have the highest over-under number across the entire division. Right now on DraftKings, their over-under is 52.5 wins. In my personal opinion, I think I would take the over on that. I think that they're going to be another competitive season, probably a good 55, 56 win team if all goes right, no injuries take place, and everything continues to run smoothly. So the Milwaukee Bucks will be entering the new season. Mike Budenholzer's gone, though. Adrian Griffin will be entering his first year, so we'll see what we got from Griffin as the new head coach of the Milwaukee Bucks. And next up for the Central Division, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers. So the Cavaliers had a tremendous season a couple years ago where they kind of turned the corner. We started to see breakout performances from Darius Garland. They added Donovan Mitchell last offseason. Evan Mobley turned into a defensive standout this past season. Jared Allen has been one of the better centers in the NBA. And they had a great year 2 years ago. They had a solid year this past year, I would say. They were quick out in the playoffs, though, as Donovan Mitchell has grown accustomed to throughout his career, spending most of his time in Utah getting one-and-dones or at the very most being kicked out in the second round. But JB Bickerstaff returns as their head coach for his fourth season. Their starting five looks the same as last year. Darius Garland, Donovan Mitchell will be in the backcourt. Isaac Okoro, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen are the forwards and centers. And then coming off the bench, they have a pretty interesting arrangement of veterans. Coming off the bench, they re-signed Karis LeVert, so Karis LeVert's back. They signed Max Strus to a 3-year deal, who broke out last season as a starter for the Miami Heat, knocked down three-point shooter, good defensive player, had a great run for them as they made it to the NBA Finals this past year. And George Niang, who's been one of the better bench players for the 76ers over the past couple of years, they also signed him. Dean Wade will also be coming off the bench, and Tristan Thompson was also re-signed too. So Thompson returns back to Cleveland, where he won a title with LeBron back in 2016. And yeah, so that's mostly their bench. Their biggest additions this offseason were Max Strus, George Niang, Tristan Thompson, and Ty Jerome was also added, who spent last year on the Golden State Warriors. They brought in a couple of rookies. One big name that they brought in was Emoni Bates. Emoni Bates was, we talked about him plenty on the show, where a couple of years ago, he was one of the top incoming freshmen, was projected to be a top 5 NBA draft pick, played terrible in Memphis, played decently at Eastern Michigan this past year, but ended up falling into the second round. He's got a ton of talent on the offensive end. He's a 6'8" shooting guard. And I think it's a very low-risk, high-reward type of a pick for the Cleveland Cavaliers. They took him in the second round. So I thought that was really good. They brought in Larry Nance Jr.'s brother, Pete Nance, and Craig Porter Jr. from the Wichita State, who's on a 2-way contract as well. So the Cleveland Cavaliers are going to be looking to bounce back. They're definitely, on paper, their team is in the range of the Milwaukee Bucks, I think. They don't, especially with Donovan Mitchell and everybody who they have on their team. Evan Mobley was arguably, if it wasn't for the insane season from Jaren Jackson Jr. last year, Mobley could have easily won Defensive Player of the Year in just his third season in the NBA. But the Bucks over-under is at 52.5, and the Cleveland Cavaliers over-under is 50.5. And I could definitely see them clearing it. I would probably take the under on that right now. I haven't seen too much to project them to be able to overtake the Milwaukee Bucks, but if all goes well, they definitely could be 53-54 win team and push Milwaukee for the top of the Central Division. So I think that those are the two powerhouses pretty much in the division. And then you got a couple of other teams that are a little bit in a rebuild. Up next is the Chicago Bulls. So the Bulls go into the new season. They're now in their fourth year under Billy Donovan. Lonzo Ball is, after missing all of last season, is projected to miss all of this season again with his leg injuries. Very, very sad what's going on with him. He's determined to come back and to be the dynamic player that he used to be. But his leg injuries do not seem like they're going to ease up. A lot of people are expecting him not to return. Still getting paid a lot of money, though. He signed that big 4-year deal with the Bulls, and they're prepped for it. They re-signed Kobe White. They re-signed Ayo Dosunmu. They signed Javon Carter to join the team, and they also have Alex Caruso, Zach LaVine, DeMar DeRozan, all guys who can play the backcourt. So makes things more interesting. So they practically have the same lineup as last season as well. Kobe White and Zach LaVine will be the starting backcourt. DeMar DeRozan, Patrick Williams, and Nikola Vucevic will be the front court. They were able to re-sign Vucevic as well. Both Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan have expiring contracts. So a lot of people think that this may be the last run that this team kind of has together, especially with the contracts that they gave to Dosunmu and they gave to Kobe White. It's probably going to be unlikely that they bring back both LaVine and DeRozan. I mean, LaVine's been in a lot of trade talks anyway. They had a very, very down year last year where they were expected to be a playoff team and one of the better contenders in the Eastern Conference, and they completely flopped. Even though DeRozan, too, had a pretty solid season, same with Zach LaVine. Coming off their bench, Alex Caruso, obviously, Ayo Dosunmu, Javon Carter. They brought Andre Drummond back, who will be a backup center for them, backing up Vucevic. And he fits perfectly being in the same front court system with Nikola Vucevic. I think they're the exactly different kinds of players. Vucevic is more of a knockdown shooter, more of an offensive guy, where Andre Drummond is a rebounder, a good presence down low, a good defender. He's a good comparison to have with Vucevic coming off the bench. And then other veterans, they got Torrey Craig and Javonte Green as well. The biggest additions this offseason, Torrey Craig and Javon Carter being them. Obviously, Dosunmu and White were big re-signings as well. And then the only rookie they'll be bringing in is Julian Phillips, who is a second rounder from Tennessee. So the Bulls practically go into the season with almost the same team as they had last year, and they had a very, very down year last year. Their over-under right now is sitting at 37.5 on DraftKings, and that's right around what they probably should be. I don't think that they're going to be much better than that. They could very well be a fourth or fifth place team in this division, especially with the Indiana Pacers getting better. The Detroit Pistons adding a lot more young pieces. We're not sure what we're going to get from the Pistons, but I could definitely see them kind of taking a bigger jump this year. So the Bulls at 37.5. I would say that with the amount of veterans that they have in the year that they had last year, I would take the over on that, just because I find it kind of difficult that they would have that down of a year again. But we'll have to wait and see. And then down below the Bulls, we've got the Detroit Pistons. So the Pistons shook up the team a lot this offseason. They were one of the worst teams in the NBA last year. Cade Cunningham will be entering the third year of his NBA career. He was injured a lot last year, was a great rookie, but they're expecting him to take a huge jump. Jaden Ivey had a great rookie season. And they also brought in Monty Williams, too, who the Phoenix Suns shockingly fired after last season. And he'll be taking over in his first year as the Detroit Pistons head coach. He signed the wealthiest head coaching contract in NBA history as well. So the Pistons put in a lot of money to be able to bring this guy in to kind of turn the franchise around. They also did add a few veterans too. Joe Harris, they were able to acquire via trade from the Brooklyn Nets. They were able to bring back Alec Burks. They were also able to bring in Monte Morris, who spent the majority of his career with the Denver Nuggets, then was shipped to the Washington Wizards last season, and now will be on the Pistons this upcoming year. But they're projected starting five, all healthy. Cunningham and Ivey would be the backcourt. They still have Bojan Bogdanovic, Marcus Bagley, and Isaiah Stewart would be the front court. And then James Wiseman, they also have that they acquired on a trade from the Golden State Warriors. They'll have Monte Morris, they'll have Alec Burks, Asar Thompson, who was their top 5 draft pick this season, Isaiah Livers, who was one of their better forwards coming off the bench, Jalen Duran as well. And they have some solid rookies. Asar Thompson, obviously a top 5 pick, could easily move into the starting 5 this season if all goes well. They're going to have to move some things around. Cunningham and Ivey are kind of clogging up the backcourt, but there's a high likelihood that even though Cunningham is a big point guard, they could end up moving him to the 3, and they might end up getting Ivey in at the 4 and maybe Asar Thompson in at the 1. It'll be interesting to see what kind of lineups they put out to start the season this upcoming year. But the Pistons are low down. You know, they've had a bunch of bad years in a row, and it's difficult to kind of project them to completely flip the script. Their over-under right now is at 28.5 on DraftKings. And that's practically the highest you'll see too. They're over-under. So they're still projected to be one of the worst teams in the NBA this season. I want to say that I would take the over on 28.5 just because I like Cunningham. I like Ivey. I like Asar Thompson. I think that adding Wiseman, Bagley, and re-signing Isaiah Stewart were big. I think that they got a lot of interesting pieces, and they got a few good veterans too. Joe Harris gives them some versatility off the bench. Alec Burks is a good scorer off the bench as well. Monte Morris as well. So I feel like they have a good, evenly leveled team. It's going to be tough to compete in the Eastern Conference. I don't think that they're a playoff team yet by any means, but 28.5 being the over-under for wins is very, very interesting. I think that's really low, but again, you know, somebody's going to have to be down to 20 wins. As of right now on DraftKings, the Wizards have the lowest over-under at 24.5. So Pistons are second lowest, which is definitely makes things very interesting. And then the final team that we'll be going over in the division is the Indiana Pacers. So the Indiana Pacers, I think, are one of the bigger question marks when it comes to this division and all the teams that we talked about, because they've got the potential to be a really good team, to be a playoff team. They have the talent, and I think that everything just has to mesh together. And, you know, if it all goes according to plan, they could be a pretty decent team. Their over-under right now is at 38.5, which is interesting. So they're projected to be a right around under 500 type of team, but they could hover around the 500 mark as well. Rick Carlisle's entering his 3rd year for the Pacers. Tyrese Halliburton was an All-NBA, All-Star talent last year. He became the face of the franchise. Benedict Mathurin was a great rookie last season, gives them more scoring. They signed Bruce Brown to a huge contract this offseason to be the defensive star at the 3 to help support Halliburton and Mathurin, who are more of offensive-minded players. Jarris Walker was also a top 10 draft pick by the Pacers, and he'll probably jump in as their starting power forward. And then Miles Turner was re-signed, one of the best shot blockers in the NBA, as well as a great three-point shooter. They also were able to add Obi Toppin via trade. Andrew Nembhard spent a lot of the season last year as the starting point guard. They have him coming off the bench. Aaron Neesmith played well. Isaiah Jackson, Jordan Nwora, T.J. McConnell, Jalen Smith, all of them return after having big years last year. Almost all of them had career years last year too. Jordan Nwora kind of was sitting the bench for the Bucks, got traded to Pacers, saw some more playing time, is becoming a better scorer. And then Buddy Hield too, they have coming off the bench. Even though they're starting to shop Buddy Hield, they couldn't agree on a contract extension with him, so they're going to be trying to look to trade him. So he'll probably be on the way out at some point this season. But to at least to start the season, he could end up being their sixth man and being one of the better sixth men in the NBA. Their top rookies, obviously, Jarris Walker's a top 10 pick. Ben Shepherd, who's a versatile shooting guard from Belmont that they took in the late first round. And then Isaiah Wong, who is a combo guard from Miami. They were also able to add. So I think the Pacers have a pretty good team. I think 38.5 is definitely a good number. I might take the under as of right now. I'm not too convinced that they're going to be able to compete in the East, but I also do believe if things go according to plan and everybody stays healthy, everything goes well, that they could definitely be one of the better teams in this division and make a surprise push into the playoffs. I mean, you know that there's going to be a couple of teams in the Eastern Conference that we project to have bad seasons that end up kind of breaking out. And the Pacers are at the top of that list, in my opinion, of teams that easily could break out and become playoff contenders. So that's going to wrap things up for the Central Division. Now jumping over to the Atlantic Division, we'll bring on our guests. We got Nick Morgasen and Ben Kruse joining the show to talk the Atlantic Division. Nick, obviously, a Brooklyn Nets fan. Ben, a Boston Celtics fan. So, guys, how are we doing?
Doing good. Finally glad for the NBA to be back. Ben, just unmute yourself. But yeah, this is going to be, I'm looking forward to this season. I'm finally glad for the NBA to be back.
Yeah, I'm doing well. Obviously, this is probably the best team right now for Boston with a championship right now. So I'm feeling good. In the next couple of weeks, we'll have some Celtics basketball and just NBA basketball back. So it's going to be exciting.
It's definitely going to be exciting. I'm interested to see how the Atlantic Division is going to play out. There's a bunch of different things that could go well. But first off, we'll recap the New York Knicks. So the Knicks had a great season last year, coming off of a kind of a down year the year before, and their first playoff appearance in nearly 10 years the year before that. So it's been kind of a roller coaster over the past 3 years for the Knicks. But they were able to make it to the second round last year. They couldn't make it past the Miami Heat, but Tom Thibodeau is going to enter his fourth year as the head coach of the New York Knicks. Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, Mitchell Robinson. Same starting five as the end of last season. Will probably be the same starting five this year. Dante DiVincenzo was also added to be one of the key players off the bench. Emmanuel Quickley and Quentin Grimes were a couple of the big backcourt pieces. I'm excited as a Knicks fan to see what this team can do. I think that they can take even the next step. Jalen Brunson has become a star player, one of the better point guards in the NBA. Julius Randle had another all-star season as well. And I love that they were able to bring Josh Hart back. Josh Hart kind of complemented the entire team really well last season. Good defensive player, good hustle guy. And they have a whole Villanova team now. They've got Brunson, they got Hart, they got DiVincenzo, and they also added Ryan Arcidiacono back. So they've got a jam-packed team full of Villanova Wildcats. So I'm excited to see what the Knicks are going to do. I don't know what you guys think, but I think that they're going to be pretty competitive.
Go ahead, Ben.
Yeah, the Knicks have been obviously growing as a team the last couple of years, and I think for Paul, as a Knicks fan yourself, you probably feel pretty good, I think, despite kind of obviously the way it ended last year. But I just think specifically that young group, that backcourt between Barrett and Jalen Brunson, and then you have the front court of Randall and Robinson, and then obviously Josh Hart, getting to him at the deadline last year was massive. So Yeah, I mean, I think, Tom Thibodeau is doing a pretty decent job with you guys, and I think you guys are just going to get better.
Yeah, I think the Knicks are a good team. I'm still not happy with the management on top, but we talk about that for years with Dolan and who's running. I don't know. Who's the GM at this point? I lost track because they play GM roulette constantly. So who's the GM right now with the Knicks? It's the former Sacramento and Cleveland guy, right? I think is the
yeah.
Perry. Is it Perry?
Yeah. They let Perry. I believe Perry is still. I get confused honestly because Mills just left, so Perry's taking over. I know Leon Rose is the president. He kind of makes like mainly the majority of the decisions. So that's the kind of guy that I like look towards to make all of, like the signings and things like that. But yeah, Leon Rose is mainly the big guy.
And who's that other guy they have? Worldwide West or whatever his name is. Whatever.
Yeah, William Wesley. He's more of like
an agent.
Exactly. He's like an agent. He's close with a ton of big name players in the NBA. So,
and it hasn't worked out once.
Nope, it hasn't.
I mean, the only guy that it's really worked out with is Bob Myers in Golden State, who was an agent, became a big time GM, and won a few championships. Now he's at ESPN. He's kind of playing the Magic Johnson role, so to speak, for NBA Countdown. Yeah. I don't know. The Knicks, like, they kind of make their way up, then they kind of plateau. Like, that's kind of what they do. And I look at their roster, like you said, you have guys like Brunson, who is the all-star on this team. I think they overpaid him, but that's neither here nor there. I don't know about RJ Barrett. I still think RJ Barrett is a huge question mark for this team. Like, he can be good. He's got a lot of potential, but I don't think he's showing his true potential really to be a top A guy. Like we look at tiers A, B, C, D. He's kind of like in between that A and B. He's kind of like a B minus the way I look at it. Josh Hart, I think, was a really good signing. I think that really was a great veteran presence. For a change, they actually needed a veteran presence because they were a young team last year. So they really needed that guy. I'm still not a fan of Julius Randle. I don't think that's a fit on this team whatsoever. He's got to control his ego and his attitude and play on the court and stop with all the other stuff. Just play the game, put up your 20 points a game, because he is a scorer. If you remember back when I think he was with Philadelphia and he was with the Lakers, he was a scorer. Yeah. Now he kind of got lost in that last season. So if he could score and Brunson could be a star, that's a great tandem. And then you get guys like RJ Barrett, who was in the rumors of being traded for Donovan Mitchell, which I'm kind of glad they didn't do. I think that would have been a fleeced trade if they did that. But I don't know. They finished what last year? I have the standings here. They finished 5th. They were 47-35. Now, the teams that were above them were Cleveland, the 76ers, the Celtics. Okay, so teams in their division, and Milwaukee. If I look at these teams, did Milwaukee get better? I don't think they got better. I think they're just coming back. Did the Celtics get better? Okay, they added Porzingis for size. That's pretty much what they really did. They didn't really do much else. Philadelphia's blown up in smoke. And then Cleveland is a question mark. Could they realistically finish second or third? It's possible, but I'm going to say it's improbable.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that there's a lot of question marks with the Knicks right now heading into the season, and as there almost always is, because I think that they're going to be competitive like they were again last year, but how competitive they can actually be is kind of to be determined. Are we going to get RJ Barrett's been inconsistent again. He's shown that he can be a very, very solid player, but has also, been, just like I said, inconsistent throughout his entire career. He'll put up a couple of 25-point games and then disappear for a few games. We haven't seen the consistency out of him. Jalen Brunson, but it's been one of the key pieces. But are they going to be able to compete with the Celtics, and are they going to be able to compete with the Bucks and the top guys in the Eastern Conference? That's going to be to be determined. I mean, they don't have that star, that all-around star player. The Celtics have Tatum, the Bucks have Giannis. They don't have that kind of guy. They have Jalen Brunson, who's, maybe a top 30 guy in the NBA, but is not a top 10. and Julius Randle too, who's you made an All-Star team again last year. So I think that them coming out of the East is definitely not in the playing cards, but I think them making like a little bit of a run, maybe topping out above like 47 wins, maybe having like 50, 51 wins or something like that, being slightly improved. I think that it's all stuff that could happen.
It's possible.
I think so too. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Paul. I think in terms of the talent for the Knicks specifically, they're probably in like the tier 2, but I think it's good enough that way like they compete with like against like a lot of good teams. Remember with the Celtics, the Knicks had our number last year. I mean, they beat us twice in Boston. Emmanuel quickly went off against us on one of the times. They played the Cavs really tough, and the Cavs are a really good backcourt with Garland and Mitchell. So it's not like the Knicks are like the team that was the pushover laughingstock type team, one of the best. They essentially have a group now where they have a lot of fighters, and they're essentially going to play to the last whistle. And I think another thing too, Paul, is that I feel like you might be a little bit excited about is the Knicks might be that type of team now where they might be able to get a recruitment of a bigger type star now with the way that they've been playing the last couple of years. So obviously, I think that's another thing to kind of take into account.
I completely agree with that. I think that they're building to be a destination again. And this is the most competitive and consistent basketball we've seen from them in over 20 years. We've seen a couple in that time. They've almost every season been under 500. They had a couple of years with Carmelo where they were good, but that only lasted 2-3 seasons. That was it. And then they were right back underneath. So since Thibodeau's kind of taken over, they've had some consistent play. They've been able to make the playoffs. And I think it just continuing to grow from that is what they need to do. And just every year taking the next step too. Like they had 47 wins last year, having maybe 49, 50 wins and, making it past another first round and maybe pushing towards pushing a series a little bit deeper than last year would be the kind of moving forward for them.
But the issue you have now is you got to push that ceiling up. Now that they made it past the first round and they almost made it past the second round, you have to push that ceiling up and say, all right, you won a first round, you almost won a second round, you got to win a second round next year. There's no going backwards. The pressure is on you now to win. New York fans are expecting you to win. You haven't won in 30, 40 years? You haven't won? You got to make a run into the semis at least this year. If you don't, it's a fail.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree with you. I think that it's taking that big step forward, having more wins, going a little bit deeper into the playoffs. That's all stuff they have to do. If they take a step backwards and they have less wins, they get eliminated in the first round again. You can't be optimistic that anything's going to change relatively soon.
We'll see what happens. They can be a good team, but will they be a good team is really the question we should ask.
That's exactly it. That's definitely it. So jumping over from the Knicks, we got the Boston Celtics, who are going to be the talk of the Atlantic Division. They made it to the NBA Finals a couple of years ago, almost made it back last year in improbable fashion, might I add, pushing that series to Game 7 and almost capping off the impossible. But they're building towards being an NBA champion. I think that Joe Mazzulla kind of stepped in and did great with that team last year. He was in a very, very difficult position. Ime Udoka was just improbably snuffed out. He had all of those issues and stuff, and Mazzulla was kind of thrown into it. He's still young, and he did a great job running that team last year. They lose Marcus Smart this season, but you add Kristaps Porzingis, and Smart was definitely one of the fan favorites and a tough one to lose. I'll turn the floor over to Ben. What are you thinking for this upcoming season? How do you like the team so far?
Yeah, it's finals or bust with this team. And it's been that way, I feel like, for the last couple of years. But I'll start with the additions and I'll start with the subtractions, as you mentioned, Paul. They got Kristaps Porzingis, which I think will help us defensively, especially our big size, because that's been one thing I feel like we've been lacking, especially against the top tier teams, is a really good defending big, along with Robert Williams, who is a really good defensive big, but he's very injury prone. So I know Kristaps Porzingis is that same way, But if those two are healthy, then I feel like Joe can kind of put in different types of matchups, specifically in the lineups, depending on what type of teams want to go against us. If they want to go bigs, we could be able to match them now, that maybe which we didn't have in the past. So I really love that move for the Celtics. Although obviously it meant us to lose something to gain something. That was Marcus Smart. Um, he's the heart and soul of that team. And that's one thing specifically I'm a little bit worried about with the Celtics this year is their leadership. Can Jason Tatum, can Jaylen Brown, two of our stars, be able to take a leadership role, and which they didn't really have to worry about that in the last couple of years when they had Marcus around. And another guy that low key I think is going to be missed is Grant Williams. I know a lot of people for the Celtics, people are just like, oh, Grant is just, he comes up the bench, plays maybe 7 to 10 minutes a game. But Grant Williams is a really valid piece. And I think for the Mavericks, they're going to get a really good one. He could defend really well. He could shoot the three. I call him Corner Grant for a reason because every single time I feel like he's in the corner, he's making that shot. So it's going to be a massive loss for the Celtics. But I do like the addition of Jordan Walsh, the draft pick that they got. I believe he was from Alabama or Texas A&M. There's either one of those schools or was a school, a really well-known school. So obviously, I apologize if it wasn't the case for that one. But I really like that.
Yeah, you're close. Arkansas. Yeah, you're close. You were in the SEC. That's all I'm
You're in the ballpark.
I was in the ballpark, yeah. So, but regardless, I really like that move, I think. And I think he's going to be kind of similar in a way with Grant. Kind of, you play 7 to 10 minutes. It looks like already in the offseason, in the summer league, he was really catching that shot. So I'm not saying he's probably going to play a lot, but he can maybe kind of get into that Grant Williams role down the stretch. But with this team, I mean, that starting five is going to be really good. I just think between Tatum, Brown, Porzingis, Rob, you can now also put Al Horford in the starting or the bench role. And I think that's one thing, too, with Al Horford. He's getting a little bit older, so you can kind of put him in different ways. I'll be kind of curious to see what Mazzulla does. And Peyton Pritchard was a guy that he was kind of in trade rumors last year, but he is now taking kind of a role where he's going to accept the bench role. And I think he's really going to do a really good job with it. And, they also added a couple of guys, the big guys off the bench. They just added Lamar Stevens from the Cavs. And one thing about Brad Stevens is he obviously picks guys that love to go off against us because last year, Lamar Stevens, who knew Lamar Stevens? And he went off against us last year. So typical Brad coming in and just, I know he's probably going to play a lot, but just a really good bench role guy to kind of keep deeping on our bench. But you look at the teams kind of in that division, Philly, we obviously own them and still in the postseason, but they're still going to be right there. We just play a really good style against them for some odd reason, which I like. But they're still going to be really, really good. The Knicks, they obviously gave us troubles last year, but they're still a really young team. You look at the Raptors. We'll see specifically about the Damian Lillard stuff because apparently the Raptors might be a team that might be looking at him. So obviously I'll have to kind of take a look into that. But I feel like on paper our roster still is better than theirs. I know Siakam is decent and, they have Scotty Barnes. And then you look at Brooklyn. Brooklyn's obviously in a page where they have a lot of young talent. I would say I won't forget about the game where we were up a lot against them, and we obviously choked typical Celtics in the second half. But I think still on paper, we're still a better team than they are. So you look at it right now, division-wise, the Celtics have the best roster. Take my bias aside, but I feel like they have the best roster still on paper. It's just a matter of doing it in the postseason, and I feel like right now the kryptonite team is Miami. And if Miami got Damian Lillard, well, that obviously takes us to get back from the finals are really tough. But I do feel like that we still match up really top to bottom with them. It could really be kind of a coin flip either way. The team, I feel like we're going to be the 2 seed because I still think Milwaukee's a little bit better. But I do think on paper we could obviously go head to toe against them now, especially now getting Porzingis. You feel like you might be able to have a little bit more big help on a guy like Giannis. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm really excited for this season. Like I said, I feel like this is the best chance for any Boston team to right now win a championship. And, Tatum's just coming into his own for another year. Jaylen Brown just has to work on that left hand because those turnovers have been killing me with that left hand for years. So, another guy, too, that didn't get a lot of talk last year, but he really stepped up is Derek White. Obviously, the Game 6 putback, I thought maybe the Cinderella comeback 3-0 after that happened, we might have had it. But obviously, Game 7 took a lot out of us. But he's going to be now kind of our Marcus Smart, I wouldn't say obviously he's going to replace him, but he's going to be the guy I feel like that's going to be the point guard now. Tatum is probably going to be your number 3, maybe Brown I'd say is 2, and then you can kind of play around with the 4 and 5 of Porzingis and Al. I'd probably say with that, but I personally think Al's going to go off the bench, and I would put Rob with Kristaps. I feel like just those two guys between rebounding, between the blocks, can really do great. But this team is just really deep, and I'm really excited to see specifically where the team goes. And Joe Mazzulla, like you said, Paul, I know a lot of people were giving Joe Mazzulla a lot of criticism in the playoffs, and deservedly so. There was some stuff that happened, but overall, you come in specific after the situation with Ime Udoka and bringing essentially the team to, right at this stretch of making potentially another finals and just coming up a lot short. That's a pretty good season. So obviously, I feel like you get into another year. It's finals or bust, but I'm excited. We'll see it where things take us.
No, definitely. I think that was great analysis, and definitely what I'm thinking about the Celtics this year too. I mean, by far they have the best roster in the division, if not in the entire Eastern Conference on paper. Going into the season, I mean, Miami's got a really tough team. Milwaukee's got a really tough team, but I like what I've seen from the Celtics, and the whole Joe Mazzulla thing too. He was tossed into the role kind of last minute, and he's young. He's basically got to learn on the fly. And I think what he was able to do throughout the season and in the playoffs, even though he did make, a few mistakes, some of his coaching strategies and stuff definitely were questionable, but it's one of those situations where overall he definitely did well. And I'm also very interested to see how he manages Porzingis and Horford this year. Which one starts, which one comes off the bench, and what kind of who he aids with the second unit. I think that's going to be really interesting. And Peyton Pritchard too, definitely seemed like he wanted out. He wanted kind of a bigger role, but now with Marcus Smart gone, I could see him having a lot bigger role this season. They aren't as guard heavy. They've got Porzingis, you got Rob Williams, you got Horford, you have Lamar Stevens, Brissett, all guys who Sam Hauser as well, all guys who are mainly forwards. And they're going to need some guards off the bench. So I definitely think that Pritchard could end up stepping up this year and being an important piece for them.
Yeah, I mean, one more other thing I forgot to mention. Sorry to cut you off, Nick. Malcolm Brogdon. I felt like was a massive piece last year to us, and I know that there was some talks potentially about him and the Celtics maybe being a little bit off in terms of their situation off the court and contract related stuff. But it seems like he's probably going to come in and be ready to go. Remember, the Kristaps Porzingis trade was on hold because it was originally going to be Marcus Smart to Memphis, and then the Clippers were going to get Malcolm Brogdon, but the Clippers were too worried about the health of Malcolm Brogdon, so they cut that trade off. So originally it was just a 1-for-1. And I think originally specifically, if Malcolm Brogdon, the Clippers were going to take, it might have not even taken Marcus Smart to leave. So it obviously, it obviously hurt, right? So, but I think Malcolm Brogdon being able to stay though and stick around, it just keeps us specifically roster-wise extremely more talented, and at least it gives us another ball handler too if Derek White just can't be able to take that role.
I mean, when I look at the Celtics, did they improve in size? They really needed to improve in size. So they got Porzingis because they were struggling at center. Al Horford is not a center. He's more of a power forward-esque player who could shoot the three. As a big man, we're seeing that as a more common thing in today's game. The big man can shoot. Back then, the big man was just in the paint and put the ball in the hoop. That's not a thing anymore. You have to be able to shoot. You're seeing Giannis shoot threes. You're seeing all these guys shoot threes. Now, the other thing that's going to be a pressure on the Celtics is the money that's on the roster. Look at the contract Jaylen Brown just got. Look at the contract previously that Jason Tatum got. Look at all this money that's on this roster. They need to win. There's too much money on this roster that they can't even, these are expensive mistakes if they don't work out. I'm telling you that right now. What did Jaylen Brown get? $304 million or something, I think was the number?
Yeah, something like that. It was like upwards towards 60 a year, I think.
Which is insane. It's absolutely ridiculous.
It's crazy, but by 2 years from now, he'll probably have like the 8th highest contract in the NBA. That's just the way that everything is headed.
Right. So it was 5 years, 304.
Okay,
5 years,
so
3 or 4.
oh,
Yeah.
good. So I did have them. Okay,
So 60.
You're pretty much there.
Yeah, so 60.7 or whatever would be AAV.
It's a ridiculous number, and it's just the whole thing with Ime Udoka. There's no excuses for what happened with Ime Udoka. Udoka did whatever he did. He had to be fired. Missoula had to come in. He is a young guy. I don't like the way he handles the media and all that stuff. Oh, well, I'm not telling you anything. That's not the head coaching position. When you're the head coach, you need to talk to the media. You don't have to give your playbook away, but you have to talk to the media. You can't refuse. That just was a bad look in every way, shape, or form. I do agree with you, Ben, that Marcus Smart off this roster is bad because he was really that veteran leader that they had on the roster. Was he a little bit of a maniac on and off the court?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, but he could score you 20 points. He wasn't a scorer, but if you needed 20 points in a big game, he would come out there and put up a big game for you if you needed that game. Or you needed a 15 or 20 rebound game. He would come out there and just own it so that other team couldn't kill the glass. So I look at the teams. They finished in second. The Sixers, like I said, are an abomination. They're falling apart. Cleveland's going to fall off. The Knicks, I think, are going to move up, but I don't know where. And you know what? I would even say Celtics have a chance to finish first because there are a lot of questions with Milwaukee and Giannis. And I always forget the other co-star in Milwaukee that's always hurt. Also, who is the
they got Middleton. They got Jrue Holiday.
But Middleton is always hurt. He's always hurt. You can't trust him in the playoffs.
The biggest thing about the Bucks is, and I think this is why Giannis has kind of expressed his frustration, is as great as Giannis is, Giannis, I think, feels like he already won the championship in Milwaukee on his own. Now, does he want to be able to stay loyal and keep on doing it with them, or does he want to maybe change something and maybe kind of change up? Because athletes do this all the time, especially in the NBA, where you've already, pretty much given everything you want to do for that city. Maybe he's kind of doing second thoughts and be like, is Milwaukee essentially going to try to do the same where I'm going to be the star for the long term? Do I really want to keep doing that? Or do I want to maybe join a team specifically with another one and, kind of win somewhere else?
By the way, I think that's ridiculous when a star says that they won a championship by themselves. That is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I mean, you could be the leader of a team and be the star, but you need all the pieces. I don't care if it's the tandem in Miami with LeBron and Wade and Bosh. You needed those players like Ray Allen and other guys, or else you're not winning. Or the same thing with the Celtics when they won with their big three. You needed those guys off the bench to win. So if Giannis is saying that he won that title by himself, that's BS in every way, shape, or form. Did he lead the team? Yes. But now we have injury questions, which is why I think the Celtics could finish number one in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. I think that they're going to be up at the top and, they're going to definitely be in the mix. So jumping over from the Celtics, we'll head to your team, the Brooklyn Nets. Jacques Vaughn will be entering his second year as the Nets head coach. Spencer Dinwiddie, Michael Bridges, Cam Johnson, Dorian Finney-Smith, and Nicholas Claxton is looking like the starting five. Ben Simmons possibly coming off the bench. So going into last season, you had Kyrie Irving, you had Kevin Durant, you had a loaded team that was going to look to possibly be Eastern Conference champs and NBA champions. Now you're going into the year with a completely different cast. Michael Bridges is your star player. What do you kind of expect out of the Nets this year? And can you see them being like a true Eastern Conference contender?
It's tough because, excuse me, again, we went through all the issues with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, who both essentially demanded their ways out of Brooklyn. Now, I think they made a killing on the trade with Kevin Durant. I think they got like 4 or 5 first-rounders, and they got a bunch of guys. They got Mikal Bridges, who I really like. He's a really good player. I think he's going to lead that team in the future. But when I look at this roster, there's really no star leader here when you look at this roster. Like, when you had Kyrie and Durant, you knew that these were your guys leading your team. And in today's NBA world, you need a star of some sort to lead the roster. They've got good players. They got B-level players. That's really where I see this team. I like guys like Spencer Dinwiddie. I like Dorian Finney-Smith. I like Mikal Bridges. They got good guys, but it's not enough.
No.
There's too many teams above them that are just going to be competitive. Like we just talked about, the Knicks are better than them, in my opinion. The Cavs, even though they're going to drop a little, I still think are better than them. I think the Sixers, I again, don't know. Celtics are better than them. Bucks are better than them. At the very least, or most, I should say, they're probably a 5th or a 6th seed.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I see it. Absolutely.
I completely agree with that. I think that they're like a mid-level team. In my opinion, I see them as like a play-in team, or at very best a 5th or a 6th, like you were saying. They have a good team. They have some solid players. Cam Johnson, they were just able to re-sign. Michael Bridges, I think, can hold his own as being the number one guy, but it's almost like the Knicks, but like a step down, pretty much. They don't have the one-star guy that you can go to, and to make things interesting, and the guy to rely on to hit a big shot when you're up against the better teams. So Brooklyn is definitely going to take a step back. It's tough when you go from Kyrie and Kevin Durant and all those guys to the kind of lineup that they're going to be putting out there this season, but they brought in a few good rookies. I think that Dariq Whitehead has a lot of talent. He's going to be hurt to start the season. Noah Clowney is pretty solid. And Jalen Wilson, too, is going to be on a 2-way contract. I think it's pretty good. So I think that Brooklyn is going to be decent. I don't think that they're going to be like any star power too much. What do you think about them, Ben?
Yeah, I totally agree with you guys. I think they're going to be like a 5 or 6 seed. I think that they're just going to be kind of in that middle of the pack. They moved on from Harden, Durant, and a bunch of the star players, and I felt like, as tough it is sometimes for that to happen for a team like that, I feel like they fed off the energy in a way in terms of the young guys playing really, really well, and kind of playing like a team where they're more of like a unit and not just as a full-on star, because that's sometimes the egos and stuff can get in the way of that. But you do need stars to win in this league, and I think that at this point in time with the Nets, that was actually one team I thought Damian Lillard might take a look at, is actually with Brooklyn, because he'd be for sure their number one star there. It'd be a massive city that you can play in. But I think with the Nets, they have Mikal Bridges, they got Claxton, they got some decent role pieces that I feel like you could probably win, a decent amount of games to at least get a play in, like you said, Paul. So I think it's going to be just a team where they're going to compete, they're going to fight. But I just think that, they just don't have enough pieces at the top to be a team where they're going to be in the deep, part of the East.
Well, Let me ask you a question. How are you selling Damian Lillard to the Nets if there's no other star there?
Well, I mean, I think with Damian Lillard, looking at other teams specifically, you look at a team like Philly. They already have they ever got like a guy like Embiid. You look at the Bucks. They have a guy like Giannis. They have you look at some of these teams where they obviously have a couple of their stars and they want the ball in their hands at all times. If you went to a team like Toronto or a team like the Nets, you know for a fact that he's going to get the ball at all times specifically. And with a team like Portland was essentially their guy, right? If you went to a team like Brooklyn, he essentially be their guy as well there too. But I think that with the Nets already, they kind of already used that star mentality for a couple of years, and I just feel like it kind of fell in their face already. So they probably want to kind of go in a route where it's more of a rebuild up for a couple of years and then maybe see where kind of things go from there.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with that. And yeah, the Nets are going to be an interesting team throughout this entire season. So those are our 3 teams, but there's 2 other teams in the division. One of them being the Philadelphia 76ers, who are in a very, very interesting situation. They bring in first-year head coach Nick Nurse now, who's coming over from the Milwaukee Bucks, won a championship with the Milwaukee Bucks. They were able to bring Doc Rivers out. So in my opinion, that's a pretty good upgrade at head coach right there. But James Harden, the whole drama going on with him, they still have to figure all of that out. What they get in return for James Harden, if they even get much, will be interesting to see. But DeAnthony Melton, Tyrese Maxey could be a pretty solid backcourt. They both had great seasons last year. You still have Joel Embiid, but Embiid is injury prone a lot, and especially without Harden, this team, with just Embiid and with all of his injuries, I think that it's going to be difficult for them to be as dominant as they've been the last couple of seasons, unless a guy like Tyrese Maxey or something takes an even bigger step and becomes like an all-star. That's the only way that I see the 76ers like truly being in the same conversation as the Celtics and the Bucks and the Heat this upcoming season, especially if Harden wants out.
Yeah. I mean, when I look at the Sixers, again, there's going to be a lot of wholesale changes. Obviously, with James Harden and all those issues going on in Philadelphia, who's going to be on his fourth team in, 4 years? I mean, like, this guy can't stay on one team. Embiid is a good player. Somehow he won the MVP. I think that was kind of a mistake on the voters' part because he was injured. And according to the new rules for the upcoming season, if he missed the amount of games he played, he would have never been the MVP, which I think is a dumb rule, by the way, also. But there's too much smoke going on right now for the 76ers. They need to figure out what their situation is. And by the way, the whole trust the process in Philadelphia is over. It's over. It's done. It never worked. How long was it? For 10 years? They said, oh, we're going to win a championship, and it didn't happen. Yeah, this team is going to drop. I mean, again, as I look at the standings, Boston's better. I even think Cleveland could pass Philadelphia this year. I really do.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
I also think the Knicks could pass them this year because they don't have a point guard, really. Like, James Harden was really that point man that was really leading this team, and now they don't have that leader. And Embiid is not a point guard. He's a big man. Like, I know he can dribble the ball and he can shoot from range, but that's one guy. I could see them dropping to like a fifth or a sixth around there too. I really do, because I just think there's too many issues. The Doc Rivers thing, I think that's ridiculous too. That was not his fault by any means whatsoever. They pretty much, James Harden pushed him out of town. That's really what happened. So for anyone to say this is Doc Rivers' fault is insane. They don't know what was going on in Philadelphia. And now I think they're going to drop. I think they're going to have a drop off this year.
That's definitely a bold take. I think that with the Doc Rivers thing, a lot of people definitely think that it was the right move to take Doc Rivers out. I respect your opinion, honestly. Like, I don't necessarily know if it was his fault or if it was, it could have been the James Harden fault. But the bottom line is, ever since he's gone there, and honestly, even before he was there, they just haven't been able to get over that next hurdle. And that's just something that's going to continue this year.
They wasted all this draft capital, all this money that they spent on these free agents. And where did it get them? Nowhere. They haven't won anything. So to blame this on Doc Rivers is just insane to me.
So if my take about Philly, I hate crossing sports, but they kind of remind me of the Buffalo Bills, a team that plays really, really well in the regular season, but I feel like in the postseason, when the time comes, the moments are just too big, and there's other teams that are above them that I feel like just play better as a unit. Joel Embiid's a very, very good player. He's a star player. James Harden, I feel like he's still a great player, but when in the playoffs come, when the big moments show, there's a lot of question marks between two guys specifically. Obviously, coaching was massive last year. Doc Rivers, I loved him in Boston, but the second round curse, I feel still like is under him in a way where he just can't take teams to that next step. But I think that they're probably still a number 4 team in the Eastern Conference. But do I think that they're going to be a championship, contender between Miami, Boston, and Milwaukee? I have to see it obviously more, because I feel like at this point in time I've already seen it and I haven't seen it yet. So I think that they're the Buffalo Bills are now in the NBA. And like I said, I hate crossing sports, but I just feel like their championship window is already closed.
And by the way, I just want to say one thing also. I agree with what you said, Ben, that obviously he has the second round blues. Like, doesn't he have like a 3-10 series record or something? Like, after the second round or whatever?
In game sevens too, because I remember before game 7 against I believe the Celtics were down 3-2 in their series against. Remember, the Celtics were down 3-2 in their series against Philly. I think it was even 3-1. Tatum in game 6 was absolutely awful for the first three quarters. The fourth quarter came around, and the game was still within reach, and he had two massive threes, and then the Celtics were able to kind of take advantage after the fact. And then it was Game 7 where Tatum dropped the 51, and I think right beforehand there was a really crazy stat about Doc Rivers in Game 7. So I'm like,
that's it. Game 7.
Just keep that curse going, and thankfully we had it half the time. So it's what it is.
Yeah, exactly. I think. Yeah, the Sixers are in a very difficult position, and it's going to be very telling, to see kind of what happens this year. I'm just interested to see what ends up with with the whole James Harden situation. If they're able to even get anything for him at this point, will be interesting enough to see. And jumping over to the last team in the Atlantic Division, probably the team that is the favorite to finish dead last in the division. That doesn't necessarily mean anything, as they could still be a playoff team. But out of the 5 teams in the Atlantic Division, we got the Toronto Raptors, who are entering the new year also with a new head coach, Darko Rajakovic, who's coming over. It was kind of a weird move, Nick Nurse getting fired from Toronto after winning an NBA championship in 2019 with them, winning their first ever championship. The Raptors also lost their star player, Fred VanVleet, who ended up signing with the Houston Rockets on a huge deal. Dennis Schroeder is going to come in to be the plug in the backcourt.
Oddest move ever, by the way.
Joining him will be us. Well, obviously Scotty Barnes will still be there. You still got OG Anunoby. You got Pascal Siakam and Jakob Poeltl. But this team all around is just a huge step down from, I think, the other 4 in the Atlantic Division. In my mind, they could still be a play-in team. I could see them being like an 8, 9, 10 seed, something like that. I don't think they're going to be much better than that. I don't see them being a top 6 team in the Eastern Conference. I maybe an 8 seed max almost. They're going to be on the lower half of the Eastern Conference. They just don't have a deep enough team to compete. Grady Dick's going to be an interesting plug-in too. He's their lottery pick that they'll be bringing in this year, but they still have some decent pieces. But VanVleet's a big loss, and Siakam misses so much time too that you can't even rule him.
He's up for a max, right?
What is that?
I think he's up for a max this coming season, right?
He is, and it seems like that they're reluctant to give it to him. So there's a ton of trade rumors too with Siakam that the Raptors may end up dealing him. Anunoby's been on the trade market the last couple of seasons, so we'll see if that even happens. But yeah, they're in an interesting situation. They're just not nearly as good as the rest.
I guess I don't know if this is a off take or not, but the Raptors needed to let VanVleet go. And they needed to let him go because he was overpaid. Could you smell the desperation by the Rockets to make a signing? What did they pay him? $130 million?
For 3 years, he's gonna be making over $40 million a year, which is insane money to get for
he is not even close to worth to that money. Let him go. Not worth putting that money on your cap. People forget NBA is a cap sport. So you have to kind of watch your money to the best of your ability. He was a good player in Toronto. I think he was part of the championship. And Nick Nurse got a bad lick in Toronto. Like that was totally not right what Toronto did to Nick Nurse. He brought the first championship there. I don't know. I don't see this team. So you're saying that you think they're going to make a playoff berth, and play in those play-in games? Is that what you're saying?
I think best case scenario is that they're a play-in team. I think that like an eighth or ninth team. When I finally put together my full predictions for the season, I gotta lay all the teams, Eastern Conference teams out. I don't have obviously every roster up in front of me, but I think that going into the season, that's where their best case scenario is going to be.
I look at their roster. It doesn't scream like playoff when you look at this roster. There are so many names, and like you said, Grady Dick, which was kind of an out-of-shoot player that they probably overdrafted, actually. I look at the rest of the roster. I don't even know half the names on this roster. That's how bad. That's when you know. When you don't know half the players on this roster, you're in trouble. and they don't have a star either.
They kind of remind me a little bit, actually, of Indiana. Pascal Siakam, Miles Turner, OG Anunoby. The Pacers and Raptors, kind of two middling teams. I think specifically they'll be even lucky to be a play-in team. I think Nick Nurse and that culture. Remember, they had Kawhi Leonard, Kyle Lowry. Those days are over with them. They're obviously going a lot younger, and they're going to rebuild. So I know with Siakam, there was reports maybe he was trying to get out of there. OG Anunoby, same thing. Van Fleet's already out of there. So they're a specific type team where they have a lot of probably disgruntled guys that'll be playing. Obviously going to probably play, but, compared to the other teams, like you guys mentioned, it's just they don't really have a chance.
I mean, when you look at Toronto, it's not really a great atmosphere for a playoff team. Like, you notice when Lowry left and went to the Heat, like, he became a playoff guy, and he was winning. And not that I'm saying that that's a perfect situation, but when Lowry left, all the attention was off him when he was in Miami. He played much better off the bench. So when you look at those teams and scenarios, they're way different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's pretty much the bottom line with the Raptors is that, at most they're going to be a play-in team, but more than likely they probably don't even make the play-in, and they're probably on one of the worst halves of the Eastern Conference. So
I mean, what's interesting though is Miami was an 8 seed last year, and look where they ended up. So
exactly.
It's hard to say like, oh, they're an 8 seed or they're a play-in team. Like now that you have extra teams in the mix, you don't know who could win now.
Yeah, and the seedings too are just up in the air. You never know who's going to deal with an injury for the first 30, 40 games of a season, and that's going to cost them from being a top 6 team to being like an 8 or 9 like the Heat were last year.
And also with the new rule that you can't sit 2 stars anymore. Now I think it's actually going to be more competitive basketball for the whole season.
Yeah,
because of that.
Yep.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. But I want to thank you guys both for coming on to the episode. We were able to polish off the Atlantic Division. We're able to polish off the Central Division. That's going to wrap things up for another episode of the 3&D. I want to thank everyone for tuning into the Empty the Bench Podcast Network for another episode. Once again, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel and follow the social media at the 3&D ETB. We'll be putting out content all week in case you missed the entire episode. Guys, anything more to say heading into the NBA season?
I'm excited for the NBA to be back. My favorite sport, to be honest. Trust me, I like all of the sports, but this is the one I look forward to this time of the year between the NBA and, of course, March Madness. So this is my time of the year. I like it.
I just want to say thanks, Paul, for having me on. I really enjoyed it. And yeah, I'm looking forward to basketball season in the next couple of weeks. Obviously with the Celtics, and then, hopefully UConn can run it back as well for college basketball. So we'll see where things go from there.
Definitely. Great having you guys on. Hope everyone has a great night, and make sure to like and subscribe to Empty the Bench on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Have a good night, everyone.